Hello, my name is Anthony Spurgeon, and I would like to introduce you to the Dragons of Victory. So allow me to explain what I mean by that. And in order to do that, I've got to tell you my story, tell you about my past. I was born in Dallas, Texas in 1996, and I was raised in a suburb of Dallas called Irving. Irving has a few distinctions. It's where the Cowboys used to play, and in 2008 they demolished the stadium, and I watched it collapse, and that was a pretty powerful experience, watching a football stadium just implode. But I grew up there, and I was raised Catholic. So initially growing up, we didn't have like one particular church parish that we attended all the time. Every Sunday we would kind of bounce around to different churches in the area. For us, my earliest memories are going to a church in Dallas called Blessed Sacrament, and then also going to churches like St. Luke's and Holy Family, which were in Irving, and also the chapel at the University of Dallas. We'd go there quite a few times too. And so growing up, my parents started to get more and more interested in what you would call, what they call it themselves, what you call traditional Catholicism. And that's what this whole thing is about. So in order to explain what traditional Catholicism even is, I need to do a bit of a history lesson. In the 1960s, in the early 60s, the Pope was John the 23rd, and he decided the Catholic Church needed a makeover, an extreme one. It needed an overhaul of its attitudes, of its appearance, of its, emphasis, of its manner and character, changing a lot of things to make the whole practice of being Catholic very different in a lot of ways. Obviously, when it comes to things like dogma and doctrine, definitionally, a dogma is unchanging. You can't change it. It's a divine law. It's what God says. It's what God wants to happen. And so, if it were to change, it would negate the whole framework of the argument, that this is a divine, that this institution was divinely established, and so anyway, that the church did not really change any dogma or doctrine, because again, they couldn't, but they decided to not talk about certain things. They decided to de-emphasize certain things. They decided to have a different approach and treat things that they used to treat as very important as not so important anymore. And mainly this concerns sex, sexual relations. That is the crux of this whole matter here, and that's what brings me to talk to you today. Because in terms of the dogmatic, doctrinal teachings of the Catholic Church regarding sex and sexuality, I think we're all familiar with it. Marriage and sex is only in marriage. That's it. And sex is between a man and a woman, and one man and one woman, period. They get married and they can never divorce. They couldn't divorce because God wouldn't recognize it. Till death do us part, right? That is completely literally taken by them. And so, and LGBT, forget about it. There's no way. Something's deeply, deeply wrong with you if you have these inclinations, and when you press them on it, they'll explain that it's not about this. It's like they oftentimes they'll try to use this sort of love the sinner, hate the sin argument by saying, some people, sometimes they'll acknowledge, but people are just born this way, but nevertheless, it's still something God doesn't want you to do, and you have to resist that. You have to fight that, who you are, and so after the changes were made in the Second Vatican Council, making the Mass, the practice of it, much more warm and welcoming, changing the orientation of the priest, or he's facing the people instead of the altar when he's consecrating the Eucharist. The style of music changed, whereas before it was very, sometimes quite beautiful, but very, very somber, very serious, very sort of choral music that puts you in a very specific mood. And the whole atmosphere of traditional Catholic masses is very quiet and serious and solemn, and I would say grim and dark. But the average mainstream Catholic mass is not like that. The atmosphere is far more light and welcoming and positive, and just the atmosphere. Now the teachings are still there. So for the most part, Catholics accepted the changes of the Second Vatican Council, but there were many who didn't and continue not to this day. There was a bishop named Marcel Lefebvre who didn't agree with the changes of the Second Vatican Council, and he decided to consecrate these four priests into bishops against the Pope's orders. And he founded a group called the Society of St. Pius X. And the purpose was to keep the old ways going, to ignore everything that happened after Vatican II and just business as usual, basically. Keep doing the rituals the same way. But Lefebvre got excommunicated for that, kicked out of the church because he broke the rules. And the group that he founded was declared in schism. Basically means they're separate. They're basically Catholics, but they're not connected to the main, body of the church. And therefore they're not legitimate at the end of the day in the eyes of the church. And so after that society was formed, a few members of that group broke away from them. And they went to the Pope and they said, we didn't like that this guy broke the rules, but we still really want to keep this Latin Mass traditional thing going. And so the Pope, granted them permission. He allowed them to form a new group called the Priestly Fraternity of St. Peter, the FSSP. Another group of traditional priests that left the Society of St. Pius X, but they have official recognition from the Pope. But they are still, because they're a splinter group from a splinter group, they still have the same overall viewpoint as the Second Vatican Council was ultimately a bad thing. And if they didn't think that, they wouldn't be doing what they're doing. But the whole thing is based on, a belief that change of any kind is bad. And so at first, I was going to have the normal educational path that most Americans have. I started at public school, and I confuse doctors. Let's just put it that way. I've always had issues with anxiety and depression. I have been my diagnoses have kind of changed as I grew up, but I think I'm definitely clinically diagnosed with anxiety and depression, and ADHD as well, and I'm somewhere on the autism spectrum too, I think. So basically I was a handful. I was a crazy kid, and I couldn't function in the public school environment, so my parents pulled me out of that after 4th grade, and they were aware of a community of homeschooling that was developing in the area. And just so everyone understands here, the typical kind of idea of what homeschooling is that you're literally at home taking classes that your parents are teaching you. And my mom is a teacher. I had that a little bit, but mostly I was going to co-ops, homeschool co-ops, where you go to some building. First growing up, it was different people's houses, And there'd be, but because all these families around us were, A, into homeschooling, and B, had a lot of kids. I came from a family of 4. We were the small family. All the families I knew, it's like 8, 9, 10 kids. I had a lot of friends. It was not an isolated experience at all. And I think basically I think homeschooling could work if done well. And I'm not disparaging or discounting homeschooling itself, but I think it needs more oversight, and I don't think it should be infused with religion necessarily, especially what I went through. So for a long time, the traditional Catholics in the Dallas-Fort Worth area did not have their own building, but they got one right around the time when I was starting high school in 2010. So I was part of the first group of kids who went to Our Lady of Fatima Homeschool Co-op. That's what it was called. And the church was called Mater Dei, and it's still there. And the co-op's still running. And that was where I went to high school. From 2010 to 2014, I attended the homeschool co-op at this church. And I'm still trying to undo the trauma that I endured during that time. And why I'm here today, the point of this whole thing is to spread a message that traditional Catholicism is a cult. And I don't say that lightly. It's a heavy thing to say, and I've even gone back and forth in my head as to whether I can even say that. Should I say more like cult-like or cult-ish or something like that? But I've studied cults avidly in recent years, and the patterns are just unmistakable. And I want to make this very clear too, that to me, being a member of a cult is not a moral failing, because these things are designed to hijack your brain. That's what they're all about. Some people out there want total control of people who they think of as inferior to them or dumber than them. People who have narcissistic, personalities or tendencies think that they know how to run the world and everyone should do their bidding. And some people learn tools and tricks as to how to actually get into somebody's head and convince them that I have all the answers and you need to do everything I say. Very different from religion. I'm an agnostic now. I'm not on an anti-religious crusade. I think religion overall can be very positive, but there's the line between religion and cult that gets crossed very often. So during the time I was at Mater Dei, there was a priest there named Phil Wolf, Father Phil Wolf. That's the only time I'm going to call him father here, because he's not my father. My dad is my dad. None of these men are my father. And I refuse to call him that. But he was what you could essentially call my spiritual advisor. I went to him for moral questions. He was often my confessor in the sacrament of confession. And he was a fanatic. He took the Church's sexual teachings, the way they were taught before the Second Vatican Council, and he took them to their absolute utmost extreme. My sexual identity was pulverized under his care, you could say. He instructed me to physically hurt myself to repel any sexual thought whatsoever. He instructed me to kneel on my fingers to expel sexual thoughts. I was so terrified. When I'm turning 14, mind you, I was so terrified of sexual things because I was told to be. Now, there was another priest there, Thomas Langlois, who I would do spiritual advising with him as well, and he would tell me I was being scrupulous and I shouldn't beat myself up so much. But on the other hand, Wolf is telling me the exact opposite. He's literally telling me to beat myself up. And to this day, since high school, I've not been in a relationship that's lasted more than 2 weeks, because this training is still in my body, and I've been going through counseling, I've been going through therapy, I've been working through it, and it's been really good so far. I'm on a personal mission to undo the damage that was done to me in that time, but I also want to speak out about my experience and to spread this message that traditional Catholicism is dangerous, and it should be avoided. And last year, the weight of what happened to me fully sunk in, and I realized that this priest had sexually abused me. Now, I want to make it absolutely clear here. I am not accusing this priest of physically touching me, but I can still call what he did to me sexual abuse. So, what does this have to do with dragons? I don't want this to be the rest of my life. That's how I feel right now. Things may change down the line. I may dedicate myself more fully to this. But to me, there's an endpoint somewhere down the line where I won't want to talk about this anymore, because again, it's unpacking trauma. It can be very difficult, and also I don't want to keep having to listen to these people or talk about these people, because they're all so vile. And I'm talking about the leaders in this area, the priests involved here, and also the lay traditional Catholics who are involved in media and sort of spearhead the movement. Again, I'm not saying that being a member of a cult is a moral failing, because they're designed to hijack your brain. So the dragon part came from the fact that traditional Catholics kind of think dragons are real. They definitely think that humans lived with dinosaurs. They're creationists. And oftentimes they'll explain stories of dragons and ancient legends as actual sightings of dinosaurs. And, before, to them, when the snake tempted Eve and God found out, he cursed the snake by removing its legs. You have to crawl on your belly. So the image of a snake with legs, that's kind of what we think of as a dragon, Komodo dragons, right? So, yeah, dragons are like evil to them, or they're pure evil, and they're kind of real beings, and they're not. There were never dragons. There were dinosaurs. We didn't live with them. Dragons have never been a thing. But they're a really, compelling mythic image. And dragons could be good or bad, You can have Smaug and the Hobbit, you can have dragon tails, you can have Ord and Cassie and Zack and Wheezy. And so dragons, like anything, can be good or bad. And so that's an attempt to sort of break through the black and white categorization that they do, and to sort of reclaim definitions from them, because all cults change the meanings of words interiorly and change what things are. And the victory part of victory, there's Our Lady of Victory, there's Mary. That phrase is often victory is often talked about in trad Catholic circles. Pause. Of culture wars and everything, we've already won. Victory is already ours. We're going to heaven. God's kingdom has already prevailed, and we're just dealing, with these pesky. We're just going through this obstacle course. But as long as we, stay on the straight and narrow and obey the rules, we're good. We're saved. So I wanted to reclaim that phrase as well, of victory, because at some point, I don't know what it'll be yet, but at some point I'll decide, okay, this is a victory. This is a victory I can hang my hat on. Maybe that'll take the form of more widespread awareness of this issue. I don't know yet, but I don't want this to be about me. I want there to be a banner So something that people who were like me, who grew up in environments like this, can get behind. An easy little catchphrase, an easy little thing to hook on to understand what we're all about. Here's what being a Dragon of Victory is all about. You believe that traditional Catholicism is a dangerous, destructive cult, and people shouldn't be involved in it. And so therefore, mainstream Catholics are more than welcome to count themselves among our ranks. And as of now, it's very loose. It's not a formalized structure at all. But again, this will be a step-by-step process for me. Maybe I'll organize this thing a bit more. But for now, if you want to be a Dragon of Victory, you are. And my friend Kevin, non-Tradicath, I consider him the original Dragon of Victory, and he's free to accept that title if he wants to. There are many people who have been part of Scientology or the Jehovah's Witnesses or Moonies who have spoken out, and there's a whole community of ex-members of there's whole communities of ex-members of these groups who speak out and raise awareness about their experiences. But there doesn't seem to be hardly any of us in terms of traditional Catholicism, and that's obviously very discouraging. It was for me, but when I saw that Kevin, when I saw Kevin's channel, and he had me on this show, he had me on his show, I was encouraged by that, and that's what this is about. This is spreading this message, and if you're out there and you're either in this situation right now, or you've left and you're still traumatized, you can get better. You can find healing, and we're here for you. And you have the power to speak out, and you have the power to say no, and to take control of your own autonomy. Obviously, it's extremely difficult because your family, your community is locked into all this, and I'm extremely grateful that my relationship with my parents is still good. They've apologized to me, and I've forgiven them. But that's a rare instance in cases like this, and I recognize that, and it's tragic, but I want the abuses to stop, and I want people to understand that this is a toxic, unhealthy, traumatic environment. And to have children be told to physically hurt themselves, to expel sexual thoughts, especially when they're going through puberty and going through their sexual awakening, it does permanent damage. And so what I'm going to be doing going forward is unpacking this thesis, explaining why I think it's true, presenting evidence, analyzing and dissecting different things that were done and said in the traditional Catholic world in order to prove this point. So thank you for listening. I wish you peace, joy, and comfort. And I hope you'll fly away to victory with me.